The clippers were already humming when they cuffed her to the chair. 2 officers, plain clothes, no warrant, no charges. Just a back room in a federal courthouse where no cameras were supposed to reach. "Go tell your boss," one of them laughed, as her hair fell in pieces onto the concrete floor. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She memorized their faces because there was one thing Officer Brad Connors didn't know. One detail nobody bothered. In 3 hours, his trial was starting. 19 victims. 6 years of buried complaints, and the federal judge presiding over his case, the one person holding his entire future in her hands, was the woman in that chair. At 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened. She walked in, head shaved, robe on, and Brad Connors looked up from the defense table and felt his blood turn to ice. "Good morning," she said. The clippers hummed. That was the first sound. Not voices, not footsteps. Just that low mechanical hum filling the small room like something that had decided to stay. She sat straight, back like a ruler, shoulders square, hands behind her, wrists cold against metal. The light above buzzed too, fluorescent, ugly. The kind of light that shows everything and flatters nothing, and has no interest in your feelings about either. Her hair was falling. Not all at once. In pieces, black against gray concrete. Each clump landing without sound, like the room itself was embarrassed by what was happening in it. The man holding the clippers was smiling. Not at her, just smiling. The way someone smiles when they're doing something they've done before and expect to do again and have never once been made to stop. The second man had his phone out. The third stood by the door, looking at the floor. She didn't look at any of them. She looked at the wall and she counted, not seconds, not breaths, reasons. 19 people, 6 years. 19 people who had walked into a system that was supposed to protect them and hadn't and never once been made to answer for it, until now. The clippers kept humming. More hair fell. The man with the phone shifted his weight. The man at the door looked at a spot on the floor approximately 2 feet in front of his left shoe and did not move his eyes from it. She kept counting. Because that was what you did when they took everything they could reach. You held on to what they couldn't. 3 hours before that room, the city was still quiet. Eleanor Hayes stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:15 in the morning. The light in there was warmer than the one that would come later. Kinder. The kind of light that told the truth without being cruel about it, which was more than most things managed. She was 58 years old. She looked it. She had stopped trying not to look it somewhere around 53, and that had been one of the better decisions of a life that contained several genuinely good ones. She adjusted the collar of her Navy suit, the one she wore for days that mattered. Today mattered. In the next room, the files were already stacked on her desk. 9 months of preparation. 14 witnesses. Documentation of 19 separate civil rights violations spanning 6 years. 2 officers. 1 clear pattern. 1 federal courtroom where all of it would finally be said out loud and entered into a record that no one could quietly make disappear. Today was the first day of hearings for United States versus Brad Connors and Troy Enfield. She had been building toward this day since the previous February. She looked at herself one more time in the mirror. Then she walked to the desk, touched the corner of the photo frame sit beside the stacked files. James Hayes looked back at her, laughing, caught mid-sentence in some story she could no longer remember the details of. Harvard graduation, 1992. Both of them ridiculous in those robes, both of them convinced they were about to change everything. Some of that conviction had been right. Some of it had been the useful delusion of young people who hadn't yet learned how hard everything was going to be. She didn't look at the photo long. She picked up her briefcase, confirmed that everything she needed was in it, walked to the front door. The city was doing what cities do at that hour. Slow and unsure of itself, a coffee shop unlocking. A man in a gray jacket, walking a dog that moved faster than he did. The light still low and angled, touching the tops of buildings before it reached the streets. She used this walk to think, not to worry. Thinking and worrying were different activities that produced different results, and she had learned over 2.5 decades on the bench to be deliberate about which one she was doing. She ran through the morning sequence. Opening statements, the first witness, the objections the defense would file and the ones she would sustain versus overrule, the precise language she would use for each ruling. She turned the last corner. The courthouse came into view. Limestone columns, wide steps. The kind of building designed to make you feel small before you walked in, which had worked on her exactly once, the summer she clerked here at 26, still learning how to walk in heels on marble floors without advertising the effort. It didn't work on her now. She felt ready, which was different from feeling safe, but was what she had, and it was enough. The security line was short at that hour. A few attorneys she recognized, a court reporter she'd worked alongside for over a decade. A young couple, defendants in something that hadn't started yet, probably, holding hands and looking at the floor with the particular focus of people trying to hold themselves together in a public place. Ben Arlo was at the reception desk, 26 years old, red hair, round glasses. The kind of young man who arrived 15 minutes early every single day and never mentioned it to anyone. He looked up when she came through the main door and smiled the uncomplicated smile of someone who was glad to see the person they were seeing. She nodded back. Henry Okafor was standing behind the metal detector. Henry was 61, broad through the shoulders in a way that had softened at the edges over the years. Hair gone salt and pepper. He and James had been friends since high school in Savannah, Georgia. 40 years of knowing each other's families, borrowing tools, showing up when things went wrong. Henry had been a pallbearer at James's funeral 4 years ago. He had stood at the graveside in the November rain and not said anything, and that had been exactly right. He looked up when she walked toward the checkpoint. Their eyes met. 1 second. Then he looked away. She noticed, filed it without reacting to it, kept moving. She placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt, stepped through the metal detector. It beeped. It always beeped. 24 years of the same underwire setting off the same machines. She had entirely stopped being self-conscious about it somewhere around year 3. She was already reaching for her briefcase on the other side, and when they came out of the hallway to her left, 2 men, moving in that space between rushing and casual that people occupy when they are executing something they have rehearsed. Not uniforms, plain clothes. That was the first thing her mind registered and held: plain clothes. Brad Connors was 46, built wide through the chest. A face that had spent 20 years arranging itself into the expression of authority without ever quite becoming the thing it was imitating. He moved to her left without hurrying. Troy Enfield was 33, thinner, younger, still in the process of deciding what kind of man he was going to be and making choices in the meantime that were answering that question whether he was paying attention or not. He moved to her right, standard flanking position, practiced, deliberate. She had seen this done to other people. Had heard it described from witness stands more times than she could count. She had never been the person it was being done to. Until now. Ma'am. Connors's voice was professionally neutral. The voice of someone who had learned to sound reasonable while doing unreasonable things. We have a situation. We need you to step aside. I'm Judge Hayes. She said it the same way she said everything in court, clearly, without decoration or apology. She reached into her jacket and produced her badge. Federal Judiciary. I have a 9 o'clock hearing. Connors took the badge from her hand, looked at it, dropped it into his shirt pocket. We'll verify that, he said. Come with us. She looked at him, and in that single moment of looking, she understood. Not that a mistake was being made, that no mistake was being made at all. He knew who she was. He had known before he came out of that hallway. The badge going into his pocket rather than back into her hand was not an oversight. It was a statement. This was planned, not spontaneous. Not a misunderstanding that would resolve itself in the next 30 seconds with an apology and an embarrassed laugh. Someone had decided this would happen today, before this specific court date, and these 2 men had agreed to be the ones who carried it out. The thought arrived whole, cold and clarifying the way important realizations sometimes did. She looked toward Ben Arlo. He had seen everything. He was halfway out of his chair, face uncertain, body already moving forward. Connors glanced at him. Just a glance. No words required. The silent language of a man who had spent 20 years learning exactly how much pressure was needed to stop someone from doing something. Ben sat back down. She looked at Henry Okafor. Henry was looking at the floor. Enfield had moved behind her. Hands behind your back, please, Connors said. The please was the worst part. The please was the part that told her he had done this enough times to know how to make cruelty sound like procedure. She thought about arguing. She had the words assembled and ready. She knew the relevant statutes, the case law, the specific federal violations occurring in real time. All of it accurate, all of it true, all of it as useful as reasoning with a wall. Because he wasn't making an error. That was the entire point of the plain clothes and the rehearsed positioning and the badge going into his pocket. He wasn't confused. He had made a choice. She put her hands behind her back. The handcuffs were cold. They were always cold, according to every defendant who had ever described this moment from her witness stand. The cold of it, the smallness of it. The way the body understands something the mind is still arriving at. She understood it now. They walked her down the corridor. her feet moving because the alternative was being dragged, and being dragged would give them something they wanted, and she had decided in the 3 seconds, since the cuffs closed, that she was not going to give them anything they wanted. Henry Okafor's footsteps did not follow. She noted this without turning around, filed it alongside everything else she was filing, because she was going to remember all of it, every detail, every face, every choice that was made and every choice that wasn't. The room was small, concrete walls. A metal chair bolted to the floor, that detail, the bolting, registered as significant. A cabinet against the far wall. The fluorescent light that showed everything and was indifferent to all of it. It smelled like cleaning products and something older underneath. The smell of a room that had been used for things it wasn't officially designated for and had absorbed those uses into its walls. "Have a seat." Connors said it the way a host says it, pleasantly, which was worse than if he had said it with menace, because pleasantness in this context meant he was comfortable. He had done this before, and it had been fine before, and he had no reason to expect this time to be different. She sat, not because he said to, because sitting was more tactically useful than standing, and she had already decided that useful was the only register she was going to operate in for however long this lasted. Infield moved behind her, hands on her shoulders, not hard enough to injure, hard enough to make a point about who was where and what was happening. Connors opened the metal cabinet. She heard the drawer, then the sound of a cord being uncoiled, a plug going into a socket, then a different hum than the light overhead. Lower, more specific. Electric clippers. She sat very still. "You know what I've noticed?" Connors said. He was talking to himself as much as to her. The monologue of a man who had convinced himself he was making a point rather than revealing one. People in certain positions start to believe the position is the thing, the title, the robe, the badge. He walked toward her. "In here, none of that travels." He brought the clippers close enough that she felt the vibration before the blade made contact. She looked at the wall directly ahead of her, and she did not give him the reaction he was waiting for. This seemed to irritate him. She could hear it in a slight change in his breathing. A man accustomed to a particular response, finding the space where that response should be completely empty, and not knowing what to do with the emptiness. She gave him nothing. Because nothing was the most accurate thing she had, and also the most powerful. The first pass of the clippers moved across the top of her head. She felt it differently than she had anticipated. Not pain, exactly. Pressure and then lightness. The strange sensation of something being removed that she hadn't known had weight until it was gone. More hair fell to the concrete floor. Enfield had his phone up. "Evidence," said Henry's voice from the door. Flat, one word. He had followed them in after all. Or been there already. She hadn't heard him. Enfield lowered the phone slightly, then raised it again. "Just for us." Henry said nothing more. She noted this, too, the fact that he had spoken once and then stopped. The fact that one word was all he could manage. The fact that he was in this room and what that meant about the 8 days before today, that she didn't yet know the details of, but was beginning to understand. Connors kept working, deliberately uneven, the sloppiness intentional, a choice rather than incompetence. Two different things that looked similar from the outside but came from entirely different places. She looked at the wall and she thought about Rosalie Drummond, 71 years old, entry 47 in the case files. Parking structure, level B2, August of 2 years prior, a broken wrist, a grandson she had been trying to protect. The complaint filed by her son 6 days later, marked reviewed and dismissed within a week, the dismissal carrying a signature she now recognized as belonging to someone in this building. Rosalie Drummond had never testified, had never been asked to, had passed away 5 months after the incident. Her son's statement in the file said she had not been the same woman after that morning. She was not the same woman after that morning. Eleanor thought about that, held it, turned it over. Then she thought about Damon. 22 years old. In a library at Howard University right now, probably surrounded by case law he was still learning to read between the lines of. She had not told him today was the first day of the Connors hearing. She had not told him because she had not wanted him to carry it while she was in that courtroom. She had wanted to carry it herself. She was still carrying it. More hair fell. The clippers hummed. She kept her back straight. Kept her eyes on the wall. Kept counting the things she was going to do when this was over, in the order she was going to do them, beginning with standing up. When Connor stopped, he stepped back. He looked at what he had done with the expression of a man admiring work that didn't deserve admiring. Then he unplugged the clippers, set them on the cabinet, turned to Enfield and said something low that she didn't catch. Enfield laughed, short, already fading. "All right," Connor said, not to her. To the room in general. to the version of this moment that existed in his head. "We're done here." He uncuffed her. Rough in a way that was calibrated, enough to communicate something, not enough to leave marks that would be documented. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and dropped her badge onto the concrete floor in front of her. Not placed. Dropped. Among the hair and the indignity of the last 20 minutes. She looked at it on the floor. Then she bent down, slowly. Without rushing, without any motion that could be read as either defeat or aggression, she picked up the badge, stood, put it in her jacket pocket. "Go tell your boss," Enfield said, opening the door. He meant it as a dismissal, as the last word, as the punctuation at the end of what they had decided this was going to be. She walked out the door, down the corridor, her feet steady on the floor, not rushing, not slow. The pace she had kept for 24 years. She did not look back at the room. Did not look at Henry, who she could feel somewhere behind her, not following. The briefcase was still on the conveyor belt where she had left it. She picked it up without slowing down, kept moving. Toward the elevator, 4th floor, courtroom 7. She had a hearing to run. In the women's bathroom near the courtroom, she stopped, stood at the sink, turned on the cold water, let it run over her wrists for a moment where the metal had been. Then she looked up at the mirror. Her scalp was uneven, patches remaining where the clippers had been careless on purpose. A spot near her left temple where the blade had pressed too close, raising the skin. The fluorescent light in here was, if anything, less kind than the one in that back room, and it showed everything. She looked at herself for a long time, not in grief, not in anger, though both of those things were present underneath, doing what they needed to do. She looked at herself in the way she looked at evidence, taking in what was actually there, not what she wanted to be there or what she feared might be there. "This is what happened," she told herself. "This is what it looks like. This is what you are carrying now, and you are going to carry it into courtroom 7, and you are going to do your job." She straightened her jacket, fixed the collar, tucked the badge securely back into her pocket, picked up her briefcase, and walked to the courtroom. The room was already full. She could hear it from the hallway, that specific frequency of a space containing too many people with too many competing reasons for being there. Reporters, community activists, attorneys from 3 different civil rights organizations, family members of people who had been waiting for this hearing for 2 years. She pushed through the door. The room went quiet in a wave, starting at the front and moving backward through the gallery, like sound being drawn out of a space. She walked toward the bench. She did not look at the defense table yet. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a hazard in your peripheral vision. Registered, noted, not looked at directly. Not yet. She was aware of Patricia, her clerks of 17 years, who saw her from across the room and whose face moved through several distinct expressions before settling into the steady professional composure of a woman who understood that this moment required exactly that. Patricia gave her the smallest nod. Eleanor nodded back. She stepped up to the bench, set down her briefcase, took her robe from its hook behind the bench and put it on, the familiar weight settling across her shoulders with the certainty of something that belonged there. 24 years of that weight. She knew it the way she knew her own breathing. She sat down, and then she looked at the defense table. Brad Connors was sitting there in a pressed dark suit, badge placed where it could be seen, posture constructed by someone who understood optics. The confident ease of a man who had spent 20 years believing the system was arranged in his favor. She watched the moment he recognized her, watched the color leave his face, watched his hand, which had been resting loosely on the table, go absolutely still. Troy Enfield, beside him, looked from Connors to the bench and back to Connors and could not seem to make sense of what his eyes were telling him. Their attorney leaned in and said something urgent and low. Connors did not respond. Eleanor opened the folder in front of her. She looked out at the room, at every face in it, at the reporters who were already reaching for their phones, at the gallery full of people who had come expecting one thing and were now in the presence of something they hadn't had language for yet. Then she spoke. "Good morning." Her voice carried to every corner of the silent chamber without effort. "This is case number 2024 CR-089, United States versus Officers Brad Connors and Troy Enfield. Are both parties prepared to proceed?" The prosecutor rose immediately. "Ready for the United States, Your Honor." The defense attorney lurched upward. "Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate. Are you prepared to proceed?" She said again. The same words, the same tone, not louder, just more certain. A beat of silence that contained several things at once. "Yes, Your Honor. Good." She turned to the first page of the morning's docket. "Then we'll begin." She got through the morning. That was what she would tell herself later, not as diminishment, but as honesty. Not that she was magnificent, not that she was fearless, that she was present and prepared and she got through it. Opening statements. 2 procedural motions from the defense, both denied with written rulings she had prepared weeks in advance because she had known they were coming. A brief recess at 11. Connors spent the morning looking at the table. His attorney had clearly instructed him to. Enfield looked at the wall. Their careful management of where their eyes went told her everything about where their minds were. At noon, she called the lunch recess. She went to her chambers, closed the door. Ate half a sandwich standing at her desk because sitting felt like something she wasn't ready to do yet. Looked at the other photo of James, the fishing trip, 2016, the grin of a man who had just caught something and knew it, and let herself feel the particular grief of wishing someone was here for a moment she had spent a long time working toward. 4 minutes. She gave herself 4 minutes. Then she went back. That evening she walked home the way she always walked home, not because the day had been ordinary, because the walk was hers, and she was not going to give them that too. The city was doing its early evening version of itself, fuller, louder, people carrying the weight of their particular Tuesdays home with them. She passed Thomas at the flower cart. He took one look at her, and his face did the thing she was going to need to get used to seeing on faces for a while. "You all right, Judge Hayes?" "I'm fine, Thomas." She wasn't fine in the way that meant everything was okay. But she was standing, she was walking, and sometimes that was what fine meant, not the absence of damage, but the continued decision to keep moving through it. Her phone had 14 missed calls and a text from a number she didn't recognize. She read the text once. Then she put the phone face down on her kitchen counter. Made tea she didn't drink. Stood at the window and watched the street below, a couple and their dog moving unhurried through the evening, and she thought about what it meant to move through the world without expecting to be stopped. Then she called Damon. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he had seen something, which meant she owed him her real voice and not the courtroom one. Mom. His voice went through her the way his voice always did, straight past everything she had managed to keep controlled all day. "I saw the news. I'm packing a bag. You're not coming." "Mom, Damon." The name, said in that particular register, had been stopping him mid-sentence since he was 12. It still worked. "You're not coming. You have class tomorrow. I don't care about. I care. You're going to class. Friday, when you come for the weekend, we'll talk about all of it. Every piece." Silence. She could feel him deciding. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. She looked at the teacup she hadn't touched, at the window. At the street below, where the couple with the dog had turned the corner and disappeared. "I'm working," she said. "That's the truest thing I have right now." A long pause. "Okay," he said. His voice had shifted, Queeter. The shift of someone who has decided to trust rather than argue, which was a harder thing and a better one. "But you call me if I'll call." She hung up, stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet. Then she reached up, slowly, and touched her own head for the first since the bathroom mirror. Felt the uneven terrain of what they had done. The rough patches where the blade had been deliberate, not in grief, in documentation. This happened. This is real. This is what they chose to do. Then she lowered her hand, got out the files, sat at the kitchen table under the lamp and opened the folder to page 47. Rosalie Drummond. The entry she had read 30 times before tonight and was now reading with a different kind of understanding. Not intellectual. Physical, the way you understand something differently once it has happened to your own body rather than only to your mind. She read until 2 in the morning. At 10 minutes before 3, a quiet knock at her apartment door. She checked before opening. The hallway was empty. On the floor, taped to the doorframe, a plain white envelope with her name typed on the front. No return address. No handwriting. She took it inside, set it on the table under the lamp. Got a letter opener. Inside, a photograph. Not of her, of documents. Personnel records, from the layout and the courthouse seal, visible at the top corner. 12 pages, photographed on what looked like a kitchen table. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in blue ballpoint, "This is what they buried. He signed everyone. There are more. No name, no contact information." She looked at it for a long time. Then she photographed it from 3 angles, sent the images to her personal email and a separate cloud account she had set up when she first began building the Connors case, put the original in a folder, labeled it, and added it to the stack. She made a fresh pot of coffee and went back to work. At nearly 3 in the morning, she finally closed the last folder, sat in the kitchen quiet for a moment. Then she went to the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The same woman who had looked back at her at 6:15 that morning. Same eyes, same jaw, same face that people had told her since law school looked like she was deciding something even when she wasn't. Above it now, the uneven landscape of what they had tried to use against her. She looked at it without flinching, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, though that was still there. Not grief, though that was present too. Something more precise than either. She felt the evidence of their miscalculation. They had done this to intimidate her, to fracture something in her before she walked into that courtroom, to make her feel small enough, or humiliated enough, or shaken enough, that she would do what people in her position had often done when the system turned its machinery against them. Step back. Go quiet. Make herself smaller still. They had done this because they thought they knew what she would do with it. They were wrong. She turned off the light, set her alarm for 5:30. She had a case to try in the morning, and the morning after that, and however many mornings it took. 3 days after the verdict of that first morning, the city woke up to a version of Eleanor Hayes it had never met. Not the one she was, the one they made. The television got there first. 6:40 in the morning, her face on every local channel. A photograph taken at the security checkpoint. She recognized the angle. The timestamp would put it at approximately the moment she was reaching for her badge, cropped with surgical precision. What remained? Her hand raised, her expression unreadable, the context completely gone. No Connors, no Enfield, no Henry Okafor standing behind the metal detector looking at his shoes. Just Eleanor Hayes, alone, hand raised, looking in the cropped version like a woman making a scene. Confrontational, said one anchor. Erratic, said the legal analyst brought in for the morning segment. A pattern of behavior that raises questions, said the third, which was the most precise kind of dishonesty, because it raised questions without specifying which questions, or why they were being raised, or who had decided they needed raising. She stood in her kitchen and watched all of it. Still in last night's clothes, which was to say the clothes she had been wearing when she fell asleep at the table at 2:40 in the morning with a highlighter in her hand, and the Connors files spread around her like a map of everything that had been buried. She had woken at 5:15 with the highlighter still uncapped and her neck at an angle that would remind her of itself for the rest of the day. She did not turn off the television. She watched the whole segment, both channels. Then the morning talk show that used the word unhinged and then immediately replaced it with unstable, and then replaced that with behavior that warrants a conversation, each substitution more carefully lawyered than the last. Because knowing exactly what they were doing was more useful than not knowing. Then she poured her cold coffee down the drain, made a fresh pot, changed her clothes and straightened her collar and looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the microwave, which showed her enough to confirm that she was presentable, and nothing more, which was all she needed, and went to the courthouse. The building felt different that morning. Not dramatically, subtly. The particular discomfort of a space full of people who all possess the same piece of information and are managing it in different directions. Some people looked at her directly, with expressions ranging from sympathy to something more complicated. Some people found reasons to look elsewhere. A junior attorney she had never spoken to held the elevator door open for her and then stared at the floor numbers with the focused intensity of a man for whom those numbers had suddenly become the most important things in his life. Patricia met her at the chamber door. The defense filed a continuance motion this morning, Patricia said, citing changed circumstances affecting their ability to prepare. Eleanor took the motion. Read the first page standing in the hallway. Changed circumstances. Beautifully vague. The kind of language that could mean anything and was designed to mean everything. They want a different judge, she said. The motion specifically references the public nature of recent events and their potential impact on impartial proceedings, which is a longer way of saying they want a different judge. She handed it back. Schedule a response deadline for end of week and find out if Drummond has seen this. He called 20 minutes ago. He'd like a meeting at your earliest convenience. His earliest convenience, not hers. The phrasing was deliberate, and both of them knew it. Tell him 10 o'clock, she said. And Patricia. She paused. Thank you for being here this morning, for being here every morning. Patricia looked at her with 31 years of this courthouse behind her eyes, 31 years of watching how things went and who held and who broke and what the difference looked like from close range. Your Honor, she said, I'm always here. At 8 that morning, Diane Cross appeared on Channel 4. Eleanor watched from her office with the door closed. Diane looked composed. She always looked composed on camera. 12 years of high-profile prosecutions had given her a kind of practiced steadiness that existed entirely independent of what was happening underneath it. She was wearing the green blazer, the one she wore when she wanted to appear both serious and approachable. Eleanor had been with her when she bought it, a department store 2 blocks from the courthouse in 2019, and Diane had asked which color communicated trustworthy, and Eleanor had said green, and Diane had bought it in 2 sizes. Whatever occurred at that security checkpoint, Diane said to the camera, with the careful emphasis on whatever that told Eleanor everything she needed to know about how much Diane knew and what she had chosen to do with that knowledge. The integrity of the judicial process must remain our highest priority. The question we have to ask as officers of the court is whether the presiding judge is able to maintain the impartiality this case requires. She said, whatever occurred at that security checkpoint, the way you say something when you know exactly what occurred and have decided, for reasons of your own, not to say it. Eleanor turned off the television, sat at her desk, put her hand flat on the Connors case file, felt the weight of it, 9 months of wait. And she thought about a woman of 36 in a courthouse elevator 15 years ago, before the first big case she had ever prosecuted alone, asking Eleanor if she thought she was ready. And Eleanor saying, "You've been ready. The question is when you decide to believe it." She had meant it completely. She still meant it, which made what she was watching on the television both more understandable and more painful than if she had never believed in Diane Cross at all. People were complicated. She had been a judge for 24 years. She knew this better than most. The question was never whether people were complicated. The question was what they did with the complicated parts. She picked up her pen and went back to work. Walter Drummond came to her office at 10 o'clock exactly. 69 years old. He had been running this courthouse for 19 of those years. In that time, he had developed the particular authority of a man so accustomed to his own position that he had stopped distinguishing between what the position required and what he personally preferred. He closed the door behind him, sat down without being invited, which told her something about how he was framing this conversation in his own mind. Eleanor, first name. A move so practiced it had become unconscious. I want to speak to you as a colleague, someone who has watched your career for a long time. Go ahead. This situation. He interlaced his fingers on his knee. It's moving faster than either of us anticipated. The union has retained outside counsel. The Police Federation is coordinating with certain media contacts. Several members of the city council are making calls. He paused. You understand what that machinery looks like when it gets moving. I've seen it get moving before, she said, usually aimed at someone else. Then you know that when it turns in a particular direction, the question isn't whether it causes damage, it's how much. He leaned forward slightly. I'm asking you to consider the case, your 9 months of work, the 19 complainants who have waited years for this. If you become the story instead of the evidence, if this becomes about you rather than about what those officers did, then the people you've been trying to help lose the hearing they've been waiting for. She looked at him. He wasn't wrong about the machinery. He wasn't wrong about the damage it could do. He had spent 19 years learning exactly how that machinery worked, which meant he was also very good at being the person who aimed it. There's a document, she said, that I've been looking at. He didn't change expression. What document? A spreadsheet. Dates over the past 3 years, monthly coordination meetings, initials in a grid. She watched his face. The initials in the WD column are a very close match to your name. A pause, barely perceptible, but there. I don't know what you're referring to. I think you do. She kept her voice even. I think you've known about Brad Connors for considerably longer than 9 months. I think you've known about the pattern. I think you've been making choices about that knowledge for years. She folded her hands on the desk. What I don't know yet is the full scope, but I will. He was quiet for a moment. Then he shifted gears with the practiced smoothness of someone who had done it before. Eleanor, you've built something real here. 24 years, a reputation that has taken a great deal to earn. I'm trying to help you protect that. I appreciate the framing, she said. But what you're describing as protecting my reputation sounds, from where I'm sitting, like protecting the people who attacked me in my own courthouse. She picked up her pen. Was there anything else? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the door, stopped with his hands on the frame. James was a good man, he said. Without turning around, he would have wanted you to be careful. James would have wanted me to do exactly what I'm doing, she said. You didn't know him as well as you think. Drummond left. She sat in the quiet after he was gone and let it settle. Then she opened her desk drawer, took out the anonymous photograph she had received 3 nights ago, looked at the courthouse seal visible at the top corner of the personnel files, looked at the blue ballpoint on the back. He signed everyone. She added it to the secured folder and kept working. Henry Okafor found her at noon. Not in her office. In the small chapel on the second floor that most people in the building had forgotten existed, technically non-denominational. In practice, the place people went when they needed somewhere quiet that was not a bathroom, and not a hallway, and not anywhere that required them to have their face arranged properly. She went there sometimes to think. Had done it for years. James had teased her about it once. "You don't even believe in anything," he had said, and she had said, "I believe in quiet," and he had said, "That's the most you thing you've ever told me." She was sitting in the second pew when she heard Henry's footsteps in the doorway. She had known his walk for 40 years. She didn't turn around. "You can come in," she said. He came in, sat in the pew across the aisle, not beside her. The aisle between them felt like something they both understood without discussing. Outside in the corridor, the ordinary sounds of a courthouse at noon, carts moving, voices overlapping. The elevator opening and closing with its particular patience. Neither of them spoke for a while. "I owe you the truth," Henry said finally. "Yes," she said. "You do." He looked at his hands. The hands of a man who had spent 23 years standing at a security checkpoint, watching people come and go through a building that was supposed to mean something. "Drummond called me 8 days before," he said. "Said there would be a situation that required security awareness. Said the appropriate response was non-intervention regardless of what I observed." He stopped. "He didn't tell me who, but you knew it was someone." "Yes, and you chose not to ask." "Yes, she let that sit between them without trying to fill it, because it deserved to sit, because it had earned the weight of silence." Henry Okafor was not a bad man. She had known him for 40 years, and she was certain of this in the way you are certain of things you have observed across decades, rather than decided in an afternoon. He was a man who had made a wrong choice for a comprehensible reason, which was in some ways harder to sit with than if he had simply been the wrong kind of person. Wrong people you could be purely furious at. Good people who looked at the floor when someone needed them to look up required something more complicated than fury. "There's a woman in the case files," she said. "Entry 47. Her name was Rosalie Drummond. No relation to Walter. She was 71 years old. She looked at the small window at the front of the chapel, the light coming through it pale and even. She went to a parking structure to pick up her grandson. She asked why he was being handcuffed. Brad Connors pushed her. She broke her wrist on the concrete floor. A pause. She never testified. Her family said she didn't leave her apartment much after that. She passed away 5 months later." Henry was very still. "She was 71 years old," Eleanor said again, "and she was alone in that parking structure, and no one stepped forward. The chapel was quiet." "There are 18 others in the same file," she said. Henry looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, not crying, but close to the territory where crying lived. "What do you need from me?" he said. The truth about what Drummond said, when he said it. Every detail you remember, in writing, signed, dated. "I'll lose the pension. Maybe." She turned to look at him directly for the first time since he sat down. "But you'll lose something else if you don't. Something that doesn't have a name on a benefits form." He held her gaze. "James would say I should have done it already. James would say a lot of things," she said. "He'd also make you a cup of coffee and sit with you until you figured out what you were going to do. He was good at that." A sound from Henry that was almost a laugh. "Almost. The worst part," he said, "is that I knew. Standing there that morning, I knew who she was. I figured it out in the first 30 seconds. And I know," she said. How are you?" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Because I have 19 people to answer to," she said, "and being angry at you takes time I don't have." She stood. "Bring me the statement by end of week, Henry. In your own words, everything you remember." She walked past him, stopped at the door. "He would have made you the coffee first," she said. "Then he would have told you what he thought. In that order." She walked back out into the corridor. Angela Voss came at 7 that evening. She appeared in the office doorway without knocking, which Eleanor had come to recognize as the approach of someone who has been standing outside working up to something and has finally made the decision to stop working up to it and just walk through the door. 43 years old. Lean in the way of someone who moved through the world efficiently rather than deliberately. A face that had arrived somewhere beyond pretty and settled into something more durable. She walked with a limp. Left leg not dramatic, incorporated into her movement the way a person incorporates a thing they have stopped fighting and started simply carrying. "I know who you are," Eleanor said, without looking up from the file she was reading. "Then you know why I'm here. I know you worked narcotics with Connors for 4 years. I know you filed a complaint against him last March. I know it was dismissed in June without investigation." She looked up. "I know you were in a car accident in August. 3-year-old vehicle, recently serviced, mechanical failure. Angela stood in the doorway, said nothing. And I know you've been quiet since August, Eleanor said. That's the part I'm still working to understand. Angela came in, sat down across from her without being invited, which Eleanor respected in the same way she had respected it when Henry didn't do it. The gesture told her something about where the person was in their own understanding of why they were in this room. I have a daughter, Angela said. She's 17. She was living with me when the accident happened. She paused. After August, I called her father and asked if she could stay with him for a while, in Portland. Another pause. She's still there. She'll be there until this is over. What made you come now? Angela looked at her steadily. I saw you walk into that courtroom. Eleanor waited. I'd been telling myself that quiet was the safe choice, Angela said. That if I waited long enough, kept my head down long enough, they'd move their attention somewhere else. She looked at her hands, then back up. And then I watched a federal judge walk into a room full of cameras with her head shaved and open a case file and start working. And I thought. She stopped. I thought if that's what not being quiet looks like, then I've been wrong about what quiet was protecting me from. She reached into the bag she was carrying. One folder, then another, then 3 more in quick succession, arranged on Eleanor's desk with the methodical care of someone who had been organizing these for a long time against the possibility of exactly this moment. 5 folders, color-tabbed, dense, 6 years, Angela said. 19 cases. I have names and dates and locations. I have 2 instances where I was present and took contemporaneous notes the same day. I have the original complaint I filed, and the dismissal letter and a chain of emails I was copied on in error when they were working out how to process the dismissal. Eleanor reached across and opened the top folder. 3rd tab, Rosalie Drummond. The entry she had read 30 times, except this version had more. Witness statements Eleanor hadn't seen before, a photograph of the injury, clinical and specific, and in the margin, in Angela's handwriting, victim declined to testify. Son states she has not been herself since the incident. Follow-up March, no response to calls. She read the margin note twice. There's something else, Angela said. She opened the 2nd folder. Near the back, a spreadsheet. Dates bunched across the top, sets of initials filling the gridded. Monthly meetings, Angela said. I have the dates and a location confirmation for 6 of them. The WD column Drummond, Eleanor said. Yes, and the column next to it. Eleanor looked at the 2nd set of initials. Looked at them for a moment without speaking. DC. 12 entries over 18 months. Diane Cross. She set the folder down carefully, the way you set down something that has just become heavier than it was when you picked it up. Does anyone else have copies of these files? No, the originals? My ex-husband's house in Baton Rouge. He doesn't know what's in the box, just that it's mine, and I'll be very unpleasant if he touches it. We're on reasonable terms. He'll keep it. You've been carrying this since August. Yes. Alone. Yes. Eleanor looked at this woman across the desk. A woman who had filed 1 complaint and gotten a car accident for her trouble, who had sent her daughter to Portland and kept 5 folders in a box in Baton Rouge and waited, alone, for a moment when coming forward seemed like something that could be survived. It's not going to be easy from here, Eleanor said. You understand that. I've had easy, Angela said. Easy got me 8 months of not sleeping. They'll come after your record. Everything that can be challenged, they'll challenge. I know. Your daughter stays in Portland until it's over. That's already decided. No hesitation. Not bravado. Just someone who had worked through the fear to the other side and found a decision waiting. What do you need from me? Eleanor pulled the 5 folders closer. Start from the beginning, she said. Leave nothing out. Angela nodded and began. They worked until nearly 11. Eleanor took notes in her small handwriting, asked questions, flagged pages, cross-referenced dates against her own files. Angela answered everything without hesitation. She had the recall of someone who had been over these events so many times in her own head that they had become a kind of internal landscape she could navigate in the dark. At 10:53, Eleanor's office phone rang. She looked at the caller ID, courthouse main line. She let it ring. Then she looked at Angela. The car accident. Did you file a report? Official report cited mechanical failure. Angela's voice was completely flat. I have the service record from 10 days before showing the vehicle was in perfect condition. Eleanor added it to the list of things she was going to need. She walked Angela to the elevator at 11:15. They rode down in silence. In the lobby, near the main doors, Angela stopped. Judge Hayes, she said it with a formality that felt deliberate. I want you to know something. She paused. I've been doing this job for 16 years. I've seen a lot of people in a lot of situations where the right choice and the safe choice weren't the same thing. She looked at Eleanor directly. I've never seen anyone make the choice you made last week and then just keep working, like that was the whole answer. Eleanor considered this. It's not the whole answer, she said, but it's the beginning of one. She watched Angela walk out through the main doors into the night. Then she went back upstairs. She had more work to do. Ben Arlo was still at his reception desk when she passed through the lobby at 11:40. He wasn't supposed to be there. His shift had ended at 6. He was sitting with a textbook open in front of him. She could see the spine from across the room, Administrative Law, second edition, and he looked up when he heard her footsteps and then looked immediately back down and then looked up again. Ben. He stood up, slightly too fast, the posture of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation for hours and has been caught mid-rehearsal. Your Honor, I have something I need to show you. She stopped at the desk. He held out his phone with both hands, slightly, the gesture of someone offering something that has cost them something. On the screen, a video, shot through the security area's glass partition from the reception desk. The angle was narrow, the image compressed by distance and glass. But the faces were there. Connors, Enfield, Henry's profile near the door, her own back walking away in audio. She pressed play. Her own voice, slightly distorted but recognizable. I'm Judge Hayes. Connors' voice, perfectly clear. We'll verify that. Come with us. Then footsteps. Then the sound of a corridor receiving them. She stopped the video, looked at Ben Arlo. He was gripping his own hands together on the desk, knuckles pale. I've had this since the morning it happened, he said. I didn't send it anywhere. I didn't. I kept trying to decide who to give it to, and I couldn't figure out who to trust. He looked at her directly for the first time since she had walked up. My family doesn't have connections here. My parents are in Ohio. My dad worked a plant job until the plant relocated. If Connors decides to make things difficult for me, I don't have anyone to call. He stopped. I'm not saying that to. I just want you to know I understand what I'm doing by giving this to you. Then why are you giving it to me? She said. Not to challenge him, because the answer mattered. He thought about it, actually thought rather than reaching for a prepared answer. Because you walked into that courtroom, he said, and you just kept going. And I thought that if you could do that, then me handing over a video was pretty much the least I could manage. She looked at him for a moment. I need you to back this up tonight, she said. Personal email, not courthouse systems. A second account if you have one. Then a written statement, what you saw, what you heard, date and time, your own words. Sign and date it. She paused. And Ben, what you just told me about your family, about not having connections, that's not a weakness. Every person in this case got targeted for exactly that reason. The fact that you're standing here anyway means something. Ben Arlo looked at her with the expression of someone being seen from an angle they weren't used to being seen from. Yes, Your Honor, he said. She nodded and walked to the elevator. The building was mostly empty at this hour. Her footsteps in the corridor, her own breathing, the low hum of the lights maintaining their tireless indifference to the hour. In her office, she secured Angela's 5 folders in the locked drawer, added the note about Ben's video to her running file, cross-referenced 3 dates that now appeared in both Angela's spreadsheet and the anonymous photograph she had received 3 nights ago. The dates matched. She sat with that for a moment. Then she wrote it down, clearly, in her own handwriting. Because handwriting was harder to question than anything that existed only in a digital file, and she had learned over 2.5 decades to document everything in at least 2 forms. It was past midnight when she finally stopped. She sat in the quiet of her office, the lamp making a small circle of warmth in the dark. Through the window, the city's lights doing what they always did, holding the dark at arm's length without ever quite defeating it. Tomorrow would bring the defense's renewed motions. It would bring whatever Drummond had decided to do after their conversation this morning. It would bring Diane Cross in the green blazer, saying careful things on television that were designed to sound reasonable while meaning something else entirely. She was ready for all of it. She picked up her bag, turned off the lamp, walked to the door, stopped, turned back, opened her desk drawer and took out the small notebook she carried everywhere, turned to the page where she had written the names. All 19 of them in the order they appeared in Angela's files. She read them, everyone, Rosalie Drummond last. Then she put the notebook back in her pocket, where it lived, close to her at all hours, and walked out into the corridor, and took the elevator down, and went home through the quiet city to the kitchen table, and the lamp and the files that were waiting for her. She had a hearing coming, and she was going to be ready for it. Damon called at 11 the next evening. She was at the table, working, the lamp on, coffee going cold in the cup she kept forgetting to drink. He had been texting her every day since the morning it happened. Small things that were not small. A photo of the Howard campus at dusk. a case from his contracts class with a note. This reminded me of what you said about evidentiary weight. The word okay? Sent at 10:30 p.m. 2 nights running, which was his version of checking in without requiring her to perform wellness she didn't have. Tonight, he called. I talked to people at school, he said, about the recusal motions, about what the defense can do procedurally. And they think Drummond has enough to force it through. Then why? Because losing a motion isn't losing a case, she said. And a case isn't only the verdict. Silence. She could hear him working through it. You're building the record, he said. Every piece of testimony, every document entered into evidence, every ruling and every objection, all of it becomes permanent public record regardless of any individual outcome. She looked at the Connors file open in front of her. Records outlast the people who tried to bury what they describe. That's always been true. It's the one thing that's always been true. A long pause. Can I come Friday? He said. You were already coming Friday. I'm asking if it's still okay. She looked at the window, at the city beyond it doing its late-night version of itself. A siren somewhere this distance, rising and falling. The particular sound of a place that never fully rests. Yes, she said. Come Friday, bring food. Real food, not whatever you made last time. That pasta was fine. The pastas had the texture of a decision you regret immediately. I was experimenting. Experiment with something pre-made. He laughed, a real one. The kind that broke through the tension of the week and reminded her that he was 22 years old and her son, and still capable of being genuinely, simply funny in the middle of hard things. She laughed too, small and real, just for a moment. I love you, he said. I love you too. Get some sleep. She set the phone down, sat in the kitchen quiet. Then she turned back to the files. She had a meeting with Diane Cross tomorrow. A meeting she had requested, not at the office, in the park 2 blocks from the courthouse, where they had sat 15 years ago on an afternoon when Diane was still figuring out who she wanted to be. She had been thinking about what to say. She was still thinking about it now. She read for another hour, made notes, flagged 3 more dates that matched entries in Angela's spreadsheet. At 1:30, she closed the last folder. She was as ready as she was going to be. The park was 2 blocks from the courthouse. Eleanor got there first. She always got places first. James had called it a compulsion. She called it preparation. They had never fully resolved the distinction, which was fine. Some disagreements were more interesting left open. She sat on the bench near the fountain. The one she and Diane had shared 15 years ago on a Thursday afternoon in early October, when Diane was 36 and still figuring out which kind of lawyer she was going to be, and Eleanor had been trying to help her figure it out without simply telling her the answer. Because telling people answers they hadn't arrived at themselves was, in Eleanor's experience, a way of giving them something that didn't quite fit and would need to be returned later. The fountain was running. The park was doing its mid-morning thing. A woman pushing a stroller, 2 men eating lunch on a bench across the path, a kid on a bicycle slightly too large for him navigating the uneven pavement with the focused determination of someone who had decided to figure it out by doing it. She watched the kid on the bicycle, making constant small adjustments. Not stopping, not asking anyone for help, just reading the path as it came and responding to it. She had been doing that for 24 years. She just hadn't always called it that. Diane arrived 7 minutes later, green blazer. Dark circles that the television lighting had not been kind enough to hide from Eleanor at this distance. She sat down on the bench without a greeting, which told Eleanor that whatever she had been rehearsing on the walkover had been abandoned somewhere between the courthouse and here. Neither of them spoke for a while. The fountain ran. The kid on the bicycle came around again, slightly more confident this pass. I was wrong about you, Eleanor said. Not as an opening move, as a fact she had been carrying for a while and had decided to put down. Diane turned to look at her. 15 years ago, I saw something you did, a case. She kept her eyes on the fountain. You buried evidence that was favorable to the defendant because it complicated your argument. You were 36 and you wanted the promotion and you thought the defendant was guilty anyway, and you told yourself the evidence didn't change the truth. A pause. I knew. Not the full details, but enough. Diane was very still. Why didn't you? Because I thought you'd correct it yourself. Eleanor turned to look at her directly. I believed in your judgment more than I was looking clearly at your choices. That was a failure of mine. She held Diane's gaze. I'm telling you this because I am not in a position today to pretend I handled everything correctly. Neither are you. Long silence. They came to me in 2021, Diane said. Her voice had changed. Not the television voice, not the professional voice. The voice underneath both of those, quieter and less rehearsed. With the file from 2009, all of it. They knew everything. She looked at her own hands. I told myself I'd find a way to manage it from inside, that I could still do good work and find leverage and eventually get out. But, she shook her head, there's no managing it from inside. Once you're in it, the only direction is deeper. I know. They have everything. If they release the 2009 file, I know what they have. Eleanor had read the spreadsheet. 12 entries next to Diane's initials. 12 meetings. 12 choices. The question isn't what they have. The question is whether you're going to let them keep using it forever. Diane looked at the fountain. If I come forward, you lose your position. Yes. Eleanor said it plainly because plainness was what the moment required. Not comfort, not softening. The disciplinary process will be public. The 2009 case will be re-examined. You'll answer for it. That's everything. It's a great deal, Eleanor said. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. She paused. But they'll keep you in that file forever if you let them. 10 years from now, 20 years, they'll still own that piece of you, and every choice you make will have to account for it. She looked at Diane. You're 51 years old. You have a lot of years left to make choices. The question is whose hands those choices are going to be made in. Diane was quiet for a long time. A cloud moved across the sun. The light in the park shifted, went cooler, then came back. I'm scared, Diane said. I know. More scared than I've ever been in my life. I know that, too. Eleanor let the silence hold for a moment. Diane, do you remember what you asked me the first time we sat on this bench? Diane looked at her. You asked me what I did when I wasn't sure I was good enough. Eleanor looked at the fountain. I told you that not being sure you're good enough is different from not being good enough, and that the work usually knows the difference even when you don't. A long moment. The work knows, Diane said quietly, like she was trying out whether it still fit. Yes, Eleanor said. It always does. They sat for another few minutes. The park moved around them. The kid on the bicycle had mastered the uneven section of path and was now moving with something approaching ease. When Diane stood to leave, she didn't say anything, just stood, straightened her blazer, walked back toward the courthouse. Eleanor sat for a while longer. Then she stood too. She had a hearing in 4 hours and a set of witness preparation notes that needed one more pass. The escalation came on a Thursday. She walked out to the parking structure at 6:40 in the evening after a 14-hour day and stood looking at what had been done to her car with the focused, clinical attention of someone documenting a scene. Red spray paint across the driver's door. 3 tires flat. Both passenger windows broken from the outside, glass on the ground in patterns that suggested something deliberate. The hood had patches where something corrosive had been applied, the paint eaten through in rough circles. Across the driver's door, in capital letters that had been done carefully enough to be legible from 20 feet, Traitor! She stood there for a moment. A parking attendant she recognized came over and then stopped a few feet away, clearly unsure of what to offer. You should call someone, he said finally. I'm going to. She had her phone out already, photographing the damage from multiple angles, methodically, moving around the car in a slow circle. Thank you, Marcus. He stood there while she worked, not speaking. Just there. Which was, she thought, what people did when they didn't know what else to do and had enough decency to do something. She called Patricia. Filed the police report by phone, arranged transportation home. Then she stood in the parking structure a little longer after Marcus had gone, looking at the word on the door. Traitor. She thought about who wrote that word. What they meant by it. Who they thought she was betraying by doing her job. The system they believed she owed loyalty to. The particular vision of how things were supposed to work that her continued presence in courtroom 7 was threatening to take apart. Scared, she thought. This is what scared looks like. Not confident. Confident people didn't spray paint parking structures. Confident people waited and maneuvered and worked the system they had spent years constructing in their favor. People who spray-painted parking structures were people who had realized the system wasn't moving fast enough and had run out of patience. She was getting to them. That was what the car told her. She took 3 more photographs. Then she walked to the rideshare pickup area and went home. The physical letters began arriving the next day. 2 that week, 1 the following Monday. Her office email. The courthouse general line somehow, which told her something about the reach of whoever was coordinating this. Each one documented, forwarded to the FBI field office contact she had established 2 weeks earlier, added to the growing file that was beginning to require its own organizational system. She did not stop working. She did not change her route to the courthouse. She did not flinch when she passed the parking structure. What she did was work. Every hour she had, every detail she could verify, every name she could protect. Every piece of evidence she could secure in a location that wasn't accessible to the people who were leaving letters at her office and paint on her car and making calls to city council members, who then made calls to certain journalists who then ran segments on the morning news about judicial impartiality. She worked, because that was the only answer she had that was bigger than what they were throwing at her. Not bigger in the sense of louder, bigger in the sense of lasting longer. Records outlasted spray paint. That was the simple fact she kept returning to. Records outlast everything if you built them right. Damon arrived Friday evening with 2 bags of groceries and his father's blue tie and an expression that told her he had been worried the whole drive down and was now converting the worry into motion. He cooked dinner. Actually cooked it. Not the experimental pasta situation of 2 months prior, but something he had clearly looked up and practiced. A pot of chicken and rice that smelled like her mother's kitchen and tasted like some who had been paying attention. They ate at the kitchen table. The files were still there. She had pushed them to one end, Damon had pushed them a little further, and they ate in the cleared space between the lamp and the stack like they had been eating at this table his whole life, which they had. He didn't ask about the case. He asked about Patricia, who he had met twice at courthouse events and found endlessly impressive. He asked about Thomas and the flower cart. He told her about a contracts professor who had a habit of calling on students with a long theatrical pause before their name that he had learned to use as a meditation trigger. She told him about the fishing photo of James, about how she looked at it during the lunch recess on the first day. Damon looked at his plate for a moment. He would have been insufferable about this, he said, in the best way. He would have called me 17 times with updates. He would have been at the courthouse at 7 a.m. with coffee for Patricia. He would have made friends with all the reporters. He absolutely would have. She smiled at that. The particular picture of James Hayes charming a press pool at 7 in the morning, which was exactly what he would have done. And then he would have come home and not slept and reorganized my file system without asking. He reorganized everything without asking. Every year, like clockwork. They were quiet for a moment, not heavy quiet. The quiet of 2 people who had the same absence in their lives and had learned to sit with it in each other's company. Mom, Damon set down his fork. I want to ask you something. Ask. When you walked into that courtroom, the first morning, after what happened, he looked at her. What were you thinking? Not for the case. In your body, what was actually happening? She thought about this honestly. Not the version she would give in an interview or a statement, the actual answer. I was thinking about Rosalie Drummond, she said. I was thinking about 19 people who had never gotten to walk into that room and be heard, and I thought that if I didn't walk in, the number would stay at 19, and if I did walk in, it might change. That's it? That's the core of it. She picked up her water glass. The rest was just putting one foot in front of the other. Damon looked at her for a long moment. I want to be a lawyer, he said. I've known that since I was 12, but I didn't know what kind until this week. What kind? The kind that walks into the room. He said it simply, like it was obvious, like it had just finished becoming obvious and he was reporting the result. Whatever that costs. She looked at her son, 22 years old, James's eyes, her chin. His own particular combination of qualities that belonged to neither of them and that she had been watching develop since he was small enough to fit in the crook of her arm. It costs real things, she said, not abstract ones. I know, things you can't always predict in advance. I know that too. He met her eyes. I watched you this week. I know, she nodded. They cleared the table together. Damon washed, she dried, and neither of them spoke much, and the quiet was the good kind, the kind that meant nothing needed to be said, because enough had already been said, and the rest was just being in the same room together, whilst the city did its Friday night version of itself outside the window. The morning of the decisive hearing arrived the way mornings that matter always do, without ceremony. The alarm at 5:30. The ordinary sounds of a city beginning. Eleanor standing at her bathroom mirror in the early dark, looking at herself the way she had learned to look at evidence, taking in what was actually there rather than what she feared or hoped to find. Her scalp had changed over the 6 weeks since it happened. The faintest suggestion of returning growth, a shadow of what would eventually come back. In the bright bathroom light, she could see the small scar near her left temple where the blade had pressed too close on a day when pressing close had been the entire point. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened the cabinet, took out the clippers. Not because anyone was making her. Not because it was required or expected or strategic. Because she had thought about it carefully for 6 weeks and had arrived at a decision that belonged entirely to her. What they had done to her in that room, she was not going to let it be erased as though it hadn't happened. She was not going to grow it back and move on as though the morning of it had been something to leave behind. She was going to carry it forward, on her own terms, in her own way. She ran the clippers slowly, carefully. The same hum that had filled that concrete room, but different in every way that mattered. Her hands free, her back not against a bolted chair, the choice entirely her own. She set the clippers down, looked at herself. This is what they tried to make into a weapon against you, she thought, and this is you deciding what it means instead. She got dressed, navy suit, the important day one, made coffee and actually drank it this time. Stood at the window for a few minutes watching the street wake up. Thomas wouldn't be at the flower cart yet at this hour, but she thought about him anyway, about the ordinary continuity of things. Then she picked up her briefcase and walked out to meet whatever was coming. Damon was waiting in the lobby. He had spent the night in the second bedroom, which had been his room when he was home from school, and before that had been his room when he was growing up, and before that had been the room they had painted green together when he was 4. And James had gotten more paint on himself than on the walls and considered this a success. He was wearing James's blue tie. She noticed this immediately and said nothing. He said nothing. They rode down in the elevator in silence and walked out into the morning together. The courthouse steps were crowded before 8. Not one crowd, 2. Separated by barriers and the loaded tension of people who wanted different things from the same outcome. On the left, people with signs. On the right, union organizers and off-duty officers and the coordinated energy of a group that had been given a message and told to deliver it loudly. She could read both sets of signs from the base of the steps without stopping. She walked up the center, not quickly, not slowly, the pace she had always kept, her heels on the stone, the sound of it carrying in the morning air. Someone from the left side called her name. Not a chant, just her name. Then another voice and another. She didn't turn around, but she heard it. She carried it with her through the doors. The courtroom was the fullest she had ever seen it. Every gallery seat. People standing along the back wall. The media pool at capacity. 3 sketch artists in the front row. FBI field agents she recognized from prior coordination meetings seated in the middle section of the gallery, with the still alertness of people who were watching and recording everything. At the defense table, Connors in a dark suit selected by someone who understood optics. Infield beside him, younger, doing a worse job of managing his expression. Their union-hired attorney organizing papers with the focused energy of someone who has prepared for battle and is not yet certain the battle is going the direction he prepared for. At the prosecution table, Diane Cross. Green blazer. The dark circles visible now, even at this distance. She was looking down at her files when Eleanor entered. Then she looked up, found Eleanor's eyes across the courtroom, and did not look away. That was everything. That single-held gaze across a crowded room was the answer Eleanor had not been certain she was going to get. She took the bench. She looked out at all of it, every face, the reporters. The family members of the 19, some of whom she recognized from depositions she had read. Angela Voss in a front-row gallery seat, not at the witness stand today, just present, which felt exactly right. Ben Arlo in the back row, slightly too upright, the posture of a young man who has never sat in the gallery before and isn't sure of the protocol. Henry Okafor in the very last row. Alone, he had called her the night before. Said almost nothing, just, "I'll be there," she had said. "I know." She picked up her gavel. "This court is in session," she said. "We will proceed." The first hour was procedural. The defense filed a renewed recusal motion. She denied it with a written ruling she had prepared 9 days earlier. They filed an objection to the scope of Angela Voss's anticipated testimony. She overruled it. They filed a motion to exclude 3 documents from the case file on chain of custody grounds. She took 12 minutes, reviewed the relevant precedent, and denied it with a ruling she read into the record in full. Each denial, the attorney's jaw a fraction tighter. Each overruling. Connors' hands on the table a fraction less still. Let them see what 24 years looks like in a room, she thought. Let them understand what they were dealing with when they decided to come for a federal judge 9 months before the trial of their lives. Then Diane Cross stood up. "Your Honor," her voice was steady, not the television voice, not the careful, managed version that had been saying whatever occurred at that security checkpoint for 2 weeks. This was the voice underneath. Clear. Decided. The voice of someone who has made a choice and is done deliberating about it. The prosecution withdraws its previous position regarding the recusal proceedings. We are prepared to present additional material evidence. The room shifted, a collective, physical shift, like a ship when weight moves. Connors turned to his attorney, fast, urgent. His attorney stood. Your Honor, the defense objects to any 11th hour presentation of overruled. She said it before he finished the sentence. Miss Cross, you may proceed. Diane looked at Eleanor one more time across the courtroom. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness. That was a longer conversation and a longer process and would require its own time. Something more immediate. An acknowledgement. An arrival. Then Diane turned to face the room. The United States calls Detective Angela Voss. The door opened. Angela walked in, 43 years old. Left leg carrying the limp she had incorporated into herself over 8 months of living with it. Back straight, chin level, not performing anything. Just present and decided and done with the alternative. She made her way to the witness stand, sat, was sworn in, looked out at the courtroom with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this specific moment for 8 months and is not going to rush it now that it's here. Diane began. Detective Voss, how long did you work alongside Officer Brad Connors? 4 years. Narcotics Division. And during that time, what did you observe? Angela's hands rested on the railing, still, not white-knuckled, not performing composure, actually composed, which was the only version that held up under this kind of sustained attention. A system, she said, not individual officers making poor decisions in the moment. A design system, targets were identified and selected. The profile was consistent across 6 years. People without resources, without connections, people who understood from experience that reporting abuse to the people responsible for investigating abuse was not a reliable path to any outcome. She paused. I documented 19 cases. Connors' attorney was on his feet. Objection, characterization, and speculation. Overruled. Eleanor looked at Angela. Continue. Angela opened the folder beside her, and she began to read names. Not fast, not performatively slow. With the exact weight each name had earned, she read all 19. The room was silent in a way courtrooms rarely were, not the silence of waiting, not the silence of procedure, the silence of people who were understanding something together in real time, the particular quiet of a truth arriving in a space that had been arranged to prevent its arrival and arriving anyway. When Angela reached the name Rosalie Drummond, she paused, one breath longer than the others. Then, 71 years old, August 9th, 2 years prior, a parking structure, a broken wrist. Her grandson she was asking about. She never testified. Her son said she never came back to being herself after that morning. She passed away 5 months later. A sound from the gallery. Small, involuntary. The kind a body makes when it absorbs something it wasn't braced for. Connors was looking at the table. His hands had stopped pretending to be still. The cross-examination lasted 90 minutes. The defense attorney tried every available angle. Angela's prior complaints, her professional history, the accident, her motives, her relationship with the complainants. She answered everything with the specific, detailed steadiness of a woman who had been preparing for this cross-examination since August and had run out of things to be afraid of somewhere around month 4. He didn't find a crack, because there wasn't one. Because the truth, when you've been carrying it carefully for 8 months, tends to hold up under examination better than the alternative. The video came next, Ben Arlo's footage, cleaned up by the FBI's technical unit, but still clearly what it had always been. A real recording made by a real person in real time of things that actually happened. Connors' face, Enfield's, Henry's profile near the door, Eleanor's back, walking away, and audio, her voice, I'm Judge Hayes. His voice, we'll verify that, come with us. The sound of footsteps. The room watched every second of it, 4 minutes and 23 seconds. In silence so complete that Eleanor could hear the court reporter's fingers on the keys. The attorney made his final move at the 3-hour mark. She had been expecting it. Not the exact form, the intent. The move you make when the case is going badly and your client has run out of legitimate options and destruction is the only remaining strategy. He rose. Your Honor, the defense has obtained documentation indicating that Judge Hayes had prior undisclosed personal contact with one of the complainants in this case, constituting an unacknowledged conflict of interest that calls the entirety of these proceedings into question. He placed a folder on the clerk's desk. Patricia received it. Brought it to Eleanor. She opened it. Read the first page, then the second, then the page with the date. Her face gave no indication of what she was reading, not because nothing was happening inside her, because 24 years of this work had given her the ability to keep what was happening inside her, while she figured out what to do with it. Inside her in that moment was something that moved through several distinct states in approximately 4 seconds. Recognition, cold clarity, fury at the audacity of it. And then underneath all of that, something almost like relief, because she had been waiting for the last card. This was it, which meant there were no more cards. She set the documents down carefully. Court will take a 5-minute recess, she said. She descended from the bench, walked through the door behind it, closed it, stood in the small antechamber alone, counted to 10, not to calm down. To give herself exactly that long to feel all of it. The cold of it, the audacity of it, the specific fury of a woman who had spent 24 years doing this work honestly and was now watching someone file a forged document with her name on it in her own courthouse in front of her own face, and then move past feeling it into deciding what to do with it. 10 seconds. She took out her phone, called Damon. He picked up before the second ring. He was somewhere with ambient noise, the lobby probably, where she had told him to wait. The Hartley matter, she said. 2019, original filing, digitally signed, public access terminal in the lobby. Can you pull it? Already moving. She heard footsteps. Fast, the sound of someone running who knows why they're running. 60 seconds. She waited. The antechamber was the size of a walk-in closet, a coat hook, a water carafe on a small table. The sound of the courtroom muffled through the door, the particular held tension of a large room full of people waiting. Got it, Damon said. Original digital signature, January 14th, 2019. I'm sending to your clerk email right now. Thank you. Mom, I'll see you after. She ended the call, stood for one more moment, squared her shoulders, walked back through the door. Court is back in session. She sat. Let the room settle. Regarding the documentation filed by the defense during recess, she turned to the display screen. I've retrieved the original digitally signed record for the matter referenced from public court archives. The original bears a filing date of January 14th, 2019, verified by digital timestamp that cannot be retroactively altered. She looked at the defense attorney. The document submitted by your office indicates a date of November 3rd, 2018. A discrepancy of 72 days. Silence. Additionally, she said, and her voice was very quiet now, the original digital signature creates a timestamp record that is verifiable and permanent. The document you filed does not contain a matching record, which means it was not created in 2018. It was created recently, for the specific purpose of introduction in these proceedings. The attorney was doing several things at once on his face. None of them looked good. This document, she said, will be entered into evidence, not in defense of Officer Connors. As evidence of additional obstruction of justice, to be referred to federal investigators currently reviewing all records related to this case. She looked at him. Is there anything the defense wishes to say? Connors turned to the attorney, said something low. The attorney did not respond because there was nothing left to say, because it was over. I thought not, she said. We'll proceed to closing. The jury went out at 4:15. They came back at 7:40, which was fast. Which told her something about the quality of what had been built over 9 months of preparations and 6 weeks of a trial that the other side had tried to derail at every turn and had failed to derail at every turn. Guilty, on all counts. Both defendants. The gallery didn't erupt immediately. It absorbed the verdict the way you absorb something you've been waiting a long time for and aren't quite sure is real yet. 1 beat. 2. Then the sound started at the back and moved forward through the room. She let it run for 10 seconds. Then she brought the gavel down, once, clear. Sentencing will be scheduled within 6 weeks, she said. Given the nature of the charges and the conduct demonstrated throughout these proceedings, the court remands both defendants into custody effective immediately. Connors looked up from the table. For the first time in this trial, he looked directly at her. She met his eyes, said nothing, because the record said everything that needed to be said. And the record would be saying it long after this moment was over, long after both of them were gone from this room and then from the world, still saying it in the permanent, unchangeable way of things that have been entered into the official accounting of what happened and what was done and who did it. She brought the gavel down once more. Court is adjourned. She found Diane Cross at the prosecution table afterward, moving through the deliberate motions of packing up files with the care of someone who is doing something with their hands because their mind needs a moment. Eleanor stopped beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. You're going to lose the position, Eleanor said, because plainness was still what was required. I know, the disciplinary process. Eleanor. Diane looked up. I know all of it. I knew all of it when I stood up today. I'd known it since the park. She held Eleanor's gaze. I've been practicing law for 20 years. I know what I walked into. Eleanor looked at her. At this woman she had mentored and believed in and watched make choices she hadn't made and then watched come back from. Not fully. Not without cost, but back. You did the right thing, Eleanor said. I did the right thing at the last possible moment. Diane looked back at her files. Don't congratulate me for the timing. I'm not congratulating you for the timing. Eleanor picked up her briefcase. I'm telling you the truth, which is what we're supposed to do. She paused. That doesn't have an expiration date. She walked out of the courtroom, into the corridor where Damon was waiting, tie slightly loosened, expression carrying everything the day had held. They didn't say anything. They just walked. Out through the lobby, past Ben Arlo at the reception desk, she stopped briefly, long enough to say his name and let him understand that she meant it as acknowledgement of everything his name now meant, and then out through the main doors into the evening. The protest crowds had largely dispersed. A few people remained on both sides of the barriers, the energy gone out of them now. The news vans were already repositioning for the live reports. The steps were littered with the debris of a long day, paper cups, discarded flyers, a sign someone had left leaning against the stone railing. She walked past all of it, down the steps, onto the sidewalk. Into the city, Damon fell into step beside her. They walked for a while without direction, the city doing its early evening version of itself around them. People moving, traffic shifting, the ordinary enormous hum of a place that had its own life entirely independent of what had just happened in a courtroom on the 4th floor of a limestone building 2 blocks behind them. "Are you hungry?" Damon said. "Yes, there's that soup place Patricia mentioned. Patricia has excellent judgment. She really does." He paused. "She also texted me at 3 o'clock to make sure I'd eaten lunch. That sounds exactly like Patricia. She included a specific restaurant recommendation and a link to their menu. That also sounds exactly like Patricia." He offered his arm, old-fashioned, the gesture. James's gesture, the same way he had offered it to her on evenings they walked somewhere together, and she had always taken it, and she took it now. They walked toward the soup place. The city moved around them, indifferent and enormous and entirely itself. And for the first time in 6 weeks, she felt something that was not quite relief. Relief was too simple, too clean for what this had been, but something adjacent to it. The particular sensation of having done what you said you were going to do. Not perfectly, not without cost, but completely. She had done what she said she was going to do, and the record existed now. Permanent. Entered. Said. 6 weeks later, she stood in courtroom 7 for the last time in this case, sentencing day. The room held the same fullness as the verdict. Different faces in some places, more family members. Angela Voss in the front row of the gallery. Not the witness stand, not in any official capacity. Just there as a person who had carried something for 8 months and was here to see the last of it through. Henry Okafor in the last row, Ben Arlo in the back, no longer at his desk, seated in the gallery for the first time, in the posture of someone who has finally understood that this seat belongs to him too. She took the bench, looked out at all of it, took her small notebook from her pocket, opened it to the page with the names. Before sentencing, she said, "This court will read into the record the names of the 19 individuals whose civil rights were violated by the defendants over the course of 6 years. These names are now part of the permanent official record of this case. They will not be sealed. They will not be buried. They will remain accessible in perpetuity." She began to read all 19, in the order they had appeared in Angela's files. In the order she had first encountered them and then carried them for 9 months and then brought them here. The room was completely silent for every name. When she reached Rosalie Drummond, she paused for one breath, then said her name clearly, age, date, what happened to her. Then she read the last 3 names and closed the notebook. "Brad Connors," she said. "The court sentences you to 15 years in federal custody. Permanent revocation of law enforcement credentials. Forfeiture of all pension benefits accrued during the period of documented misconduct." Connors said nothing. His hands on the table were still. "Troy Enfield." She looked at him. Younger, frightened in a way that had not changed since the verdict came in. "Your cooperation with federal investigators has been considered. It does not erase what was done, but it is a choice you made. 9 years in federal custody. Permanent revocation of credentials." She looked at the room. "Walter Drummond has tendered his resignation and is cooperating with the ongoing federal investigation. That process will proceed independently of this court." A pause. "What this court will say is that the suppression of 19 civil rights complaints over 6 years required active participation at multiple levels of this institution. The investigation will follow the record wherever it leads." She set down her pen. "This court has one final order. All personnel files related to the defendants, previously sealed under administrative order, are unsealed effective today and entered into permanent public record. Every complaint, every dismissal, every name of every person who came forward and was turned away." She looked at the gallery one last time. "Those names are now part of the official record. Permanent, retrievable. They cannot be buried again. She raised the gavel. Court is adjourned. She found Henry Okafor in the corridor afterward. He was standing at the window at the end of the hall, not looking at his phone, not talking to anyone. Just standing at the window, watching the street below, where the late afternoon sun was doing something particular to the tops of the buildings across the way, lighting them gold and temporary. She stopped beside him. They stood together without speaking. "There's going to be a community forum," she said after a while, "next month, for people affected by the Connors cases. An opportunity to be heard on the record." Henry didn't respond immediately. Outside, the light on the buildings was changing as a cloud moved through. "I'm going to read the names," he said, "at the forum, all 19. He said it in the voice of someone who has arrived at a decision through a long interior process and is now on the other side of it, not because I'm required to, because I was there that morning and I looked at the floor, and I need to stand somewhere and say those names out loud, everyone." She looked at him. "James would say it's the least you could do," she said. James would say exactly that. The corner of his mouth moved, almost. "He'd also make me terrible coffee and sit with me for 3 hours while I figured out how to start." He would. They stood for another moment. "He talked about you constantly," Henry said. "For 40 years. It drove the rest of us slightly insane, honestly. Every time something interesting happened in this courthouse, every time you made a ruling someone tried to challenge, every time they wrote something about you in the paper." He shook his head. "Ellie said this, Ellie handled that, Ellie would've." He stopped. "He was very proud of you." She didn't speak for a moment. "I know," she said finally. "He told me, but it's different hearing it from someone else." "He told everyone else too," Henry said. "Constantly. It was a lot." She laughed, small and real. Henry's expression shifted, something loosening in it. "I should go," he said. "I need to start writing those names down." He looked at her directly. "Thank you, Ellie, for giving me the chance to do it differently." He walked down the corridor. She watched him go. Then she stood at the window alone for a few minutes, looking at the city below. The street and the people on it and the light that was going golden, and then amber, and then the color that came just before dark, when everything looked briefly more like itself than it did at any other hour. Then she picked up her briefcase and went home. That night she stood in her bathroom, late, the apartment quiet. Damon had gone back to Washington in the afternoon, and the second bedroom had the settled emptiness of a space that had recently been occupied by someone you love. She stood at the mirror and looked at herself, 58 years old. The small scar near her left temple. Eyes that had the look they always had after a case closed. Not relief exactly, more like the recalibration of a person who has been oriented toward one fixed point for a long time and is now adjusting to its absence. She thought about Rosalie Drummond. She thought about Angela Voss in a parking lot in Portland picking up the phone to call her daughter and saying she could come home now. She thought about Ben Arlo in the gallery, in a seat that was his, understanding that it had always been his. She thought about Henry Okafor, sitting down somewhere tonight, to write 19 names on a piece of paper he was going to stand up and read out loud. She thought about Diane Cross packing a box in an office she was leaving, beginning something she didn't have a name for yet, but that was, at minimum, honest. She thought about Damon, his father's tie, the soup place, his arm in hers on the sidewalk while the city moved around them, indifferent and enormous and entirely itself. She thought about James, who would have been there. Not with speeches or gestures or the performance of support, but in the actual ways. Coffee for Patricia, conversation with the reporters, a reorganized file system she would have pretended to be annoyed by, 3 hours at the kitchen table the night before the verdict going through everything one more time, even though they had both known there was nothing left to add. He would have been there. He wasn't, and she had done it anyway. She reached up and touched the scar near her left temple, lightly, the way she had been touching it for 6 weeks. Not in grief now, not in documentation, in something she didn't have a precise word for. The acknowledgement of something that had happened and had cost her something, and had also become, in the way that serious things sometimes did, a kind of clarity she hadn't possessed before it. She lowered her hand, turned off the bathroom light. In the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the dark, the city outside her window doing its late-night version of itself. Someone's car on the street below. A siren somewhere, rising and then fading, the sounds of a place that never fully went quiet. She thought about tomorrow. There would be a new docket, new cases, new people who had come to courtroom 7 looking for something the system was supposed to provide and had often failed to provide and would need to be held to providing. There would be work. There was always work. She lay down, pulled the blanket up, closed her eyes. Outside, the city held the dark at arm's length the way it always did, imperfectly, persistently, with the particular determination of something that had no intention of stopping. She understood that. She always had. She slept.